right now, my family is making croissant s'mores, swimming in the pool, and drinking Fireball. But I'm podcasting because that's dedication! Woo! Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Die Hard MMA podcast. I'm your host, as always, Clint McLean. And this week, the UFC is headed to Minneapolis, Minnesota for UFC on ESPN 3. And I am excited to be back. I am ready to go. I am pumped for this card. We got through last week's shit show of a card. Unfortunately, we posted a loss for it. But you know what? It was a surprisingly fun card to watch. And I gotta tell you, I don't remember a whole lot of it. I was having a damn good time, if I do say so myself. It was actually pretty funny because I was getting shit for miscalculating the score of the night. I went down 3 units last week. The picks went 3 and 3. The fight picks for -3 units, unfortunately. We had a bit of a bad night, but I posted initially that I had -2 units. The reason I did that is because I was at a blackjack table and I was about 9 shots of Fireball deep, and I did the math wrong, and people on Twitter were giving me crap for that. And I'm like, come on, don't tell me math is easy when you're drunk, because I was a little too far in to be doing math. So, honest mistake. I'm not trying to pull one over on anybody, I swear. I also want you to know that I am just not that kind of a guy. I am open and transparent and honest about everything I do. I'm telling you what I bet. I'm telling you how many units I'm putting on it. And I will never hide a losing night. Not once have I ever sat here and been like, oh, well, you know, I guess we broke even when we really lost 2 units. I'm not going to hide 2 units. Never. I will always tell you all straight and tell you exactly what is up. To quote the Wedding Crashers rule book, rule number 76, no excuses, always play like a champion. So by now, all of you know the drill. If you are new to the podcast, welcome to the Die Hard MMA podcast. First thing that we like to do is recap the previous UFC card. We go over the bets. We decide whether or not we regret the bet that we made, which maybe I should do a segment called Regret the Bet. That would be pretty good. But we go over the fights and we go over what we did, and we kind of try and learn some lessons from what we had the last week and then take those moving forward. So last week, like I said, we went 3 and 3 on picks for -3 units, and really nothing went right, which is really unfortunate because just like the Bellator card, I felt like I had an absolute beat on this card. I felt like I really knew what I was looking at top to bottom on it. We dodged some bullets, we made some solid plays, and it just did not pan out. I haven't given this speech for a little while, but remember, when we are sports betting with anything, we are looking for 55%. If you are 55% correct lifetime, you are a long-term winner as a sports bettor. So I blew right out of the gates on this podcast. Those of you who were with me at the very beginning know this. We went 4 straight months without a single losing event, and I have been on a bit of a skid lately. The losing streak has been a little painful to take, but we have been exercising proper bankroll management. We are taking small shots. We are not compounding losses. And yes, we are on a skid. We have taken a couple of 1-unit losses, 2-unit losses, and like last week, a 3-unit loss here and there. But overall, because we are being careful and because we are putting our money in good value spots more often than not, we are still up units. So the record as of now is 69 and 62 on fight picks for plus 24.19 units. And while that hurts to slip under that 25 unit mark, we are still profitable on the podcast, and variance just has been a bitch lately. So let's get right on into it. We kicked our night off with kind of more of a nail biter than I expected. We had the parlay at plus 168 with Darren Wynn, KGB, and Brian Barberena. Darren Wynn got it done. Let me tell you, Eric Spicely showed up so much more than I expected him to. Now, news came out later that apparently he had a negative number in his bank account going into that. He needed that fight something awful. And those are the kinds of things that you can't handicap. If we had gone back and we knew that this was a desperate man going into this fight, not just, hey, this is my second shot at the UFC, but desperate to put food on the table for himself and his family. The way he came out, he actually caught Win with a couple big knees that scared me. He rocked him a couple times, and he really was just not giving up. I thought he would go down to some of the bombs that Win was landing, and he refused. But that's why we love the sport of MMA. Those are the kinds of things that you cannot predict. Those are the kinds of things that you just cannot estimate are going to happen. So unfortunately, when I did the degenerate parlay for everybody on Twitter, it died right away on the first one because I thought Win was either going to put him away early with those big bombs he was throwing, or Spicely was going to get in there and land some kind of flashy, crazy submission early because he knew he couldn't go the full 3 rounds. Well, unfortunately, what ended happening is Spicely hung in there. So we got the win for the parlay with Darren Win. Sorry, no pun intended there. But we did not get the under, and that killed the degenerate parlay, which is a shame because all the other marks hit up until the main event, and we could have hedged off on it. But such is life. So moving right along, Rosenstruck damn near set the UFC's record for a knockout. He got it done in 8 seconds, I think, 7 seconds, something like that. So Rosenstruck inside the distance cashes easily. That one we were banking on. That one we saw coming from a mile away because Crowder just is not on that level. We did, you know what? I want to take just a second here and pat myself on the back. Molly McCann showed up and she got it done against Ariane Lipski, and we accurately avoided that fight. We had KGB, my lady, tied up in a parlay that parlay we've got going with Win, KGB, and Barbarena. We nailed that one. She looked like a beast, and rather than throwing Lipski in there in that parlay, we successfully avoided that absolute trash can of a fight. Now, I say trash can of a fight, I don't mean that. I just mean that it wouldn't have gone the way that we had wanted it to. I thought that Ariane Lipski was the rightful favorite. Molly McCann showed us all that is just not true. She beat the brakes off of her for 3 full rounds, and anybody that cashed on that giant dog price on Molly McCann, congratulations. But we also have to take a pat on the back simply for dodging the bullet, because if we had parlayed Lipski with anybody, that parlay would have been shattered. Then one of the most disappointing fights of the night for me personally, Chirico did not get it done for us as a nice, big, juicy underdog. Kevin Holland comes through with the 3-round decision, and wow, that was the perfect situation. That's exactly what we want when we bet these big underdogs around plus 160, plus 180, plus 200. You want them to fight for you, and you want it going 1-1 into the third. If they're either ahead on the scorecards or it's an even fight and it just comes down to who wants it more in the third round, that's exactly where you want your money. There's an argument to be made that Chirico won the fight, period. Now, there was a bit of a shortcoming that he just didn't do a lot in the third round, and that's what slipped away, and that was highly unfortunate for our bet because Kevin Holland ends up getting the nod. But I think we made the right bet. Anybody that was on Kevin Holland, you're betting on a one-armed fighter, and he had to go and get it done in the third round, and you laid that big old price with him. You could not have been feeling comfortable in that position, whereas I was about ready to do a cartwheel because I was pretty sure Chirico was coming home for us, but unfortunately he took his foot off the gas. And that will happen when you bet the big dog sometimes. So I will not put that bet in the regret category. Not even close. That was perfect. That's what we want. That's what I love to see when we take those big underdogs. It's just unfortunate that he didn't go for it in the third round like we needed him to. And that's the kind of thing where I can't be standing cage side with a whip, unfortunately. Because if I could, go Chirico, go! He wouldn't have stopped if I was there with a whip. I love you, Chirico. If by any chance you happen to listen to this podcast, it's for entertainment purposes. I'm not actually threatening you. I won't whip you, I promise. So anyway, we move on. Like I said, KGB Lee gets it done. Dominating decision by 3 rounds. And then we got to the main and co-main event of the evening where everything fell apart. So we were live on our big underdog for the night. We had called everything basically spot on and perfect as far as the over-unders, who was gonna win, who we shouldn't have bet on. We nailed it all the way up until this point, and then we just needed our 2 big anchors to come through, and neither of them did. Holy cow, what happened to Randy Brown? This guy has shown me absolutely nothing. He is an athlete, He's the kind of fighter who I've found incredibly disappointing because he has all the physical tools and just could never put it together. And that's exactly why we bet against him. I don't like laying the wood on Barberena as a big favorite. He's a good even money type of guy, or he's a good underdog because you know he's never going to quit. You know he's always going to fight for you. But it's so dangerous laying the wood with him. But I really thought in this spot he was just going to be too much for Randy Brown. Well, Brown took about a year off after the last fight. And that boy did some work. He put it together. That was the most complete and impressive Randy Brown by a mile that we have ever seen in the UFC. And props to him. I mean, it's one of those ones where he busted our parlay, and that really sucks because we had 2 out of 3 legs, and we were about to cash a nice juicy plus 168. And that really, really sucks. But I have to tip my cap to that as a fan of the sport. As a fan of mixed martial arts, I love seeing that. I love seeing the growth. I love knowing that he was able to dig deep and put it together and is a very capable fighter, and we will have to keep an eye on him moving forward. It's just unfortunate that we counted him out when he finally decided to get it together. But like I said, before this, he showed us nothing. He showed us bad fight IQ. He showed us that he could not put it together. So really, when we look back on it, I like our parlay. And I don't regret it. I don't regret making that play. Once again, the dice roll went against us this time, but it would have been, I don't know anybody who bet Randy Brown. I know a couple of people that sprinkled him just because of the line. I don't know anybody out there pounding their chest that was like, this fight is going to Randy Brown. Nobody thought he was going to win. So can't feel too bad about that. Sucks for us. We move on to the main event, and Renato Moicano, holy cow. So, okay. This is the one that I kind of want to get into. This is the one that buried us because we laid 2 units to win 1 with the minus 200 favorite Renato Moicano. And I know a lot of sharp people that also bet Renato Moicano in this spot. When you go skill for skill, when you go technique for technique and style for style, Renato Moicano has all the pieces, and he was deservingly a minus 200 favorite in this spot. I am a huge fan of Chan Sung Jung, so I'm not speaking poorly of him in any way, but basically all Moicano needed to do was avoid getting sucked into a brawl. And he let that happen in 60 seconds. It only took the zombie 60 seconds to make Moicano decide he wanted to get in there and slug around. And that is a horrible decision. Obviously, he paid the price for that. And that is another spot where really I could not have ever guessed that in a million years. So if you came to me today and I hadn't watched the fights and you sat down next to me and you went, Chan Sung Jung, the Korean zombie, beats Moicano, and I knew the outcome of the fight, and you went, okay, so how does he do it? Tell me how he does it. I'd be like, well, it's Chan Sung Jung, so I mean, he probably gets it done by knockout. I don't think he can go a full 5 rounds with Renato Moicano. I just don't see that happening. So if he gets it done by knockout, when does he get it done by? Maybe the end of round 3? Maybe early round 4? After Renato has implemented his game plan and he's put really everything he can on the zombie, and the zombie just refuses to die and he stays in his face. Moicano gets a little tired and then wilts, and the zombie just pours it on him. He probably gets TKO'd at the end of round 3 or the beginning of round 4. I never would have imagined the zombie could KO him so cleanly in the first round. Holy crap. Again, as a mixed martial arts fan, I loved seeing that. That was so fun for me, just from a fan standpoint. It was painful for me from a betting standpoint because that was my big lay the wood moment. I don't like betting favorites. You all know that. If you're new to the show, the dogs are where it's at in MMA, and I do my very best to find live dogs. Well, 2 really massive dogs came through on this card, and I can honestly say, looking back, that I still don't know that I would have taken those shots. All you Chan Sung Jung bettors out there, congratulations, cashing that big bet. That was a great fight, and it was a great cash for all of you. I really think Renato Moicano is the better fighter, and this was a fight IQ situation. He got sucked into a brawl very quickly, and that was just a bad choice. I really thought he was going to attack the legs. I thought he was going to stick and move, mind the distance. And he decided to just go for it and paid the price. And unfortunately, so did we. So that is enough of that. Once again, we're posting a bad night, and I hate to do that, but the best thing about MMA is it's year-around, and we are on a 9-week run, ladies and gentlemen. We have got fights coming out the wazoo coming up, and some of them are good. This week is one of those weeks that is so good, and I am excited for. The UFC returns to ESPN3 for another freebie card. We don't have to pay for this one, and there are some names on this one. There's some young up-and-coming talent, some newbies in the UFC, but then also some very recognizable names. So this one is gonna get interesting. No more ado. I am excited. Let's dive into the breakdowns for UFC Minnesota. The night kicks off in the UFC's heavyweight division where Maurice Green, 7-2-0, faces Junior the Baby Albini, who is 14-5-0, and I call him the baby because if you missed his first fight in the UFC, he literally wore a diaper, and it was the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. Neither of these guys are overly impressive, I'll be completely honest. This is only going to be the third UFC fight for Maurice Green, and he just doesn't look like he's a top-tier talent. I don't think we're expecting a whole lot of him going forward. Now, Junior Albini has been in the UFC for 4 nights. He won his UFC debut against Timothy Johnson by first round KO, and we thought we were onto something. Since then, he has lost terrible fights. A unanimous decision to Andrei Arlovsky. He was a victim of the Alexei Olenek, the boa constrictor's Ezekiel choke, which no mixed martial artist at that level should ever get submitted by. If you've done one day of jiu-jitsu, you know how to get out of an Ezekiel choke. And the only defense for it is not getting into it in the first place. I can't believe the guy has multiple of them in the UFC. And then he lost by a head kick KO to Rosenstruck, who we know is a beast from last week. So no shame losing to those 3 names. They are legends of the sport. But when you're on a 3-fight skid, you don't tend to keep your job. So Junior Albini is coming in here into this fight, and we know this is a must-win for him. If he loses here to Maurice Green, he is getting cut. And the line accurately reflects that. It is a pick'em fight right now. It is opened at -110, -110 pretty much everywhere, and it has not moved. There's a slight favor to Junior Albini over on Bookmaker at -120, and I am steering completely clear of this fight. I've taken every opportunity I've had to fade Junior Albini. I just do not think much of the guy. Actually, that's a lie. We bet on him once, and we were severely disappointed. We will not be doing that again. Now I'm taking every single opportunity I have to fade the guy. But this is a spot where I don't know if Maurice Green is ready to go. Believe it or not, Albini has shown sparks of brilliance, like in his debut when he KO'd Tim Johnson. He had his moments against Andrei Arlovsky. It took Rosenstruck until the second round to get that KO, and he didn't look horrible in the first round either. So, I mean, he's a serviceable heavyweight mixed martial arts fighter. So I don't know where he matches up with a guy like Maurice Green, who is just fresh and new. I want to say that Maurice Green is the pick, but with everything riding on this fight for Albini, he's probably going to show up motivated. This is the definition of a pass fight. I have no interest in putting a bet on either one of these. I think if you put again, don't do this. If you put a gun to my head and made me make a pick, I would go with Junior Albini just because I think he knows he's not going to get an easier fight than this. He knows it's never going to be a step down from here, and if he doesn't win this, he loses his job. I'll bet you he squeaks this one out, but I'm not expecting a whole lot, and it wouldn't surprise me if he did not get it done. We're going to roll right on into the women's strawweight division where Emily Whitmire and Amanda Ribas are going at it. Emily is 4-2-0. Amanda is 6-1-0. And this is a weird spot where Emily Whitmire is a -185 favorite. And she's got a 4-2 record over this Amanda Ribas. And we just don't have a whole lot of information on either of them at this point. Amanda Ribas, this is her UFC debut. She is brand new to the organization, so we've really got to see what she's got. And she has been out since 2016. We've seen Emily Whitmire a little more recently. She fought in 2018 and 2019. She's on a 2-fight win streak, but she is only 4-2. And there's concerns of Ribas having the ring rust. I believe she's coming off a USADA suspension. But I mean, really in a mid to lower level women's MMA fight. You're getting plus 145 on Rebus. I mean, I guess if I had to make a pick, that's the direction I'd go. I would roll those dice. But this is blind. This is absolutely 100% blind. And I have no interest in touching either one of these fights. I didn't look into it a whole lot because there's just not a lot to look into here at this point, especially considering we don't know what Rebus has been up to besides, she says she's been training for the past 3 years, but beyond that, we really don't know. She's been a finisher so far in her career, again, fighting low-level regional style talent, but she has been a finisher. She's got 5 of those 6 wins coming by finish, but coming off of a USADA suspension, she may have lost a little bit of that pop. She may have lost a little bit of that second gear that she's been able to shift into. So let's just watch this one, sit back in, and wait for a better spot. There's going to be a lot of big boys on this card. We're moving back into the light heavyweight division where Dalucha Lungibula is fighting Dequan Townsend, and both of these guys are making their UFC debut. This is another one where both of these men are stepping into the cage for the first time for the UFC, and I'm not touching it. I don't have a clear read on what either of them can do. Dalucha obviously has a more impressive record at 9-1-0 versus Dequan's 18-7-0. I also have an automatic bias because Dequan's fight name is the Tarantula, and I hate spiders. So I'm going to go with champion Dalucha for literally no reason. Now, he's an explosive finisher, and I think this is going to be the kind of guy the UFC wants to get behind. We've seen that with a couple of the other fighters that they've really been pushing lately, some of them actually later on this card that we will mention, but he seems like the kind of guy the UFC is hunting right now. So I've got a bit of a sneaking suspicion that Dequan is being brought in to make Dalucha look good, honestly. So we'll just sit back. We're going to stay nice and comfortable on the couch for the first couple fights on this card. We'll watch that one and keep an eye out for these guys and see who does what, because that might open some spots in the future. Now, finally, we get to a couple of names that we might know in the UFC's premier division, the lightweight division. Jared Flash Gordon, 14-3-0, is facing Dan Moret, 13-5-0. And this is a really, really fun spot because both of these guys are coming off of really bad losses, and this feels like a loser leaves home kind of match. Loser leaves town kind of match. The loser has to get their asses out of their home. That would be terrible. Put the pink slips on the line, boys. Now, Jared Gordon. Now, this guy, I'm relatively high on Jared Gordon. The dude's a beast. He's shown some really, really good durability. He's got that good finishing ability. He's got that killer instinct that I like to see. He's got good hand speed, good footwork. He came in there and got it done against Hakron Diaz and Michel Quinones in his first 2 UFC fights. One by KO, one by decision. They were both nice performances. He got in there with Diego Ferreira, and I know that fight ended in the first round via brutal KO, but Ferreira's a beast, man. He's only lost to Dustin Poirier and Beneil Dariush. He is something to look out for. So the fact that Flash was able to look good against him before that KO loss, to me that says something. I mean, I know you don't want to get excited about a guy that loses by KO, but you've got to take the little lessons where you can. Now let's hop over to Dan Moret, who is 13-5-0. He trains out of the MMA lab here in Phoenix, and he is... I don't want to badmouth them in case they let me do any interviews someday or something, but he's not looking too hot. Now, where Jared Flash Gordon stepped into the UFC and he won his first 2 UFC fights before running into some tough competition, Dan Moret stepped into his UFC career by losing to Gilbert Turinho Burns, who is a monster. Don't get me wrong, I am high on Gilbert Burns as well, but he got crushed by Gilbert Burns in the second round, and he was getting hurt in the first round as well. So the UFC throws him a softball, right? He gets to face Alex White. White is 13-5-0, and he has losses on his record. Let's back that up, actually. Let's not talk about Alex White's losses. Let's talk about his wins. In the UFC, he's defeated Evanston Payan. He's defeated Artem Lobov, the GOAT, so we got to give him a little credit there. Mitch Clark and Dan Moret, who is who we are talking about. So let's go through those, right? Evanston Payan, he is no longer in the UFC, and he hasn't been for a long time. Not only that, he hasn't even been winning outside of the UFC. So he got dropped after losing to Alex White in 2014. He drops down to Rage in the Cage, which actually, ironically, is a local promotion here in Phoenix, Arizona as well. But then he hops up to Bellator, gets KO'd there in 30 seconds. He moved on to Titan FC where he lost, and then he has 2 wins in his last 7 bouts after that. So he basically is a scrub that can't cut it on the regional scene, much less the UFC scene. Artem Lobov, he just won bare knuckle boxing. We all love him. He's the GOAT. That's all said very ironically and jokingly. The dude has a losing MMA record. He's 13-15. So the fact that he beat him was not that big of a feather in his cap. And then he beats Mitch Danger Zone Clark, which I do love the name, by the way. But he's another one of these guys who, in his UFC run, he's gone 2-5. So he is not a UFC level talent, and I don't know if we'll ever see him in the UFC again. Watching Alex White, there is nothing special about him. Dan Moret was able to get out ahead of him in the first round and grapple the crap out of him. Now, as soon as Dan Moret started to slow down, he started to get pieced up. Surprising nobody. The dude has chin issues and he leaves himself wide open. As soon as he let up, Alex White started pounding on him. And this is the guy who can only beat the bottom feeders that the UFC has to offer. Dan Moret is going to get mauled by Jared Gordon. He's going to come out and he's going to look to wrestle for about the first 3 minutes of this fight, and then he's going to leave himself open, or Jared Gordon's going to be able to get back up to his feet. And you know what? Even if Dan Moret wrestles him for the entire first round, the second round starts standing. Dan Moret will gas out, and Jared Gordon will put it on him. I fully expect Jared Gordon to win this thing inside the distance, and apparently everybody else does too, because right now the line is sitting at about minus 330, minus 325. It's up as high as minus 350 in places, and it's hilarious to see because 93% of the money has come in on Dan Moret, and the dog line has only gotten wider. So 93% of the tracked bets have come on Dan Moret, and that is still not enough to close this line. The 3 or so percent of the money that's coming in on Jared Gordon is enough for the bookmakers to move that line further in his favor. What we are going to do in this case is absolutely brutalize a line that I think is so far off, I'm having a hard time comprehending it. Over at 5 times, we can get Gordon wins by KO at plus 380. Ladies and gentlemen, the very first bet of UFC Minneapolis makes my giblets wiggle. We're getting plus 380 for Gordon to win by KO. Let's take a look at this thing. Gordon has a 43% knockout rate. He's won 6 of his 14 fights by knockout. Now, he KO'd Michael Quinones in the UFC just recently, and he was banging with Diego Ferreira and Joaquim Silva. Sorry about that. Now, Dan Moret has 2 KO losses. 2 of his 5 losses have come by KO, and he has never been submitted. So even though Flash Gordon has some moves on the mat, it is far more likely that he wins this thing by KO. If you want to protect yourself just a little bit, you can get Gordon inside the distance at plus 269 instead, but you're giving up a little over a full dollar on that bet, and I just don't see the submission happening. I'm going to take Jared Gordon to win this thing by KO because I guarantee you, Dan Moret's going to get tired. Dan Moret's going to get on his feet, and when he gets back up on his feet, he will be wobbled and he will get put away. He got KO'd brutal by Hani Barcelos in the first 50 seconds of round 2. He got KO'd brutal by Gilbert Burns in the first 60 seconds of round 2 back in 2018. He's suffered 2 really bad KO losses in just the last couple of years, and even when he fought Alex White, he was getting hurt. I'm surprised that one made it to the judges' scorecards, but I think that was because Alex White was willing to engage in the grappling, and I think he gassed out as well. Jared Gordon is the kind of guy that gets to his feet, he locks and loads those shots, and then he sits on them. So when this thing gets to round 2 and round 3, I really think Gordon is just going to put Moret away. Let's roll, baby. Big money. Our next fight for UFC Minneapolis is Jordan Griffin, the native psycho. He's taking on Vince Murdoch. Now, Vince is 10-5, and he is making his UFC debut coming off of 2 TKO losses. If that doesn't tell you what's going on here, I really don't know what will. Jordan Griffin, the native psycho, 17-6-0, just got grinded out via decision to my boy Dan Ige, who, by the way, that's a bet that I regret from last week because I was this close. Now, I know you can't see me, but I'm doing that thing where you squeeze your little finger. I was so close. I made an official lean to Dan Ige, and I really wanted to give him out as a pick. I got talked off him. That's one. I'm going to segue here for just a second. I apologize. We're going to take a sidebar for just a moment here. I am trying to shut out the noise. Something I need to do is have more confidence in myself, my own reads, and my own picks. I understand I'm going to be wrong a lot. I understand that I'm going to whiff from time to time. But there have been several cases lately where people who I talk to and break down MMA with, people whose opinions I value, they talk me off of plays. I see value and I see things that I like in fighters and in matchups. And every once in a while, I'll get reined in and I'll get talked off something. And nothing hurts worse than when somebody who you trust tells you to go against a pick that you really like. And even if they don't come right out and tell you to go against it, I'm not blaming anybody. I'm in control of the picks that I make. I'm in control of the bets that I make and the plays that I give on this podcast. I understand that. I'm just saying, when you hear something that sways your opinion, and then when you get to the fight and you go, fuck, I should have made the bet. Should have pulled the trigger. I knew. I was the one who knew I was right. It feels so bad looking back on it and realizing that you cost yourself, and in my case, my followers, easy money. We could have been all over Danny Gay, and we weren't, because I let some stuff sink in, and I let that one get on by us. So for that, I apologize. That is a bet that I regret from last week, and that is the kind of thing that we're going to look at for this fight, because Danny Gay is a hell of a fighter, and he's a hell of a wrestler. The fact that Jordan Griffin steps in off of an impressive UFC Dana White Tuesday Night Contender Series finish and got ground out by a veteran, a good, solid fighter like Danny Ige, that doesn't say shit. Now, Vince Murdoch is coming off of 2 bad KO losses, and he's making his step into the cage. And, oh boy, Vince Murdoch isn't getting any love in this fight. Jordan Griffin opened up as a minus 275 favorite, and he's been bet all the way up to minus 400. He is far and away the favorite in this spot, and unfortunately, I don't know that there's any value for us to be had here. I mean, obviously, I'm going to go with Jordan Griffin as the pick to win this thing, but I don't really see much of an angle for us to get on here. You can take Griffin to win by KO at plus 475. I mean, that might be a good dice roll to have, because Murdoch's kind of a banger, and he's coming off of 2 really bad KO losses. But, I mean, he's 28 years old. He can make those adjustments. He can come back and get it done. And Jordan Griffin is one of those guys who mixes it up really well. He's got 4 decisions, 5 KOs, and then 8 submission victories. So he really can kind of end this fight any way he chooses to. You can get Jordan Griffin by submission at plus 140. And odds-wise, I don't think that's a bad bet, because we're doing that thing where you take a massive favorite, you get him at the more than likely way that he wins a fight, and you're getting a slight dog light on it. So I wouldn't hate anybody for taking a stab on Griffin at plus 140. And even if you feel like parlaying this guy and stuff, I think he's good as that kind of a piece. I'm going to steer completely clear, because this is one of those ones where if I take that submission prop at plus 140, the fact that Vince Murdoch's been rattled a couple times back to back, if he comes out there and Jordan Griffin's made some improvements and lands a bomb and that plus 475 cashes and we lose a unit on the submission prop, I'd be super upset. I just would not be happy with myself. And same thing, vice versa. I would roll the dice on that 475 by KO. I really would. And I might sprinkle that personally myself, because that's juicy when you're talking about a chinny fighter who doesn't belong in the UFC being brought in to make an example and to show off this guy that you really want to get behind, because that's exactly what the UFC is doing here. That is a juicy, juicy line to be on the same side as the UFC. So I will probably sprinkle that. But if we sprinkle that, no problem. If I put a full unit on it, though, and then he wins by submission, it's like, damn it, we knew he was going to win by submission. Why did I do that? So this is one, just enjoy the ass beating. Sit back, relax. If you got $5, throw it on Griffin by KO and pray. We're back with the big boys. Eric, yo boy, Anders is facing Vinicius Moreira. Now, I did watch the Kenny Florian and John Attic podcast, so I know I'm pronouncing that last name correctly because they do that cool little thing where they have the fighters pronounce their name for you so you can hear exactly how you're supposed to say it. So I know I'm saying that right. You double roll the R's. Morera. So I've been waiting. I've been waiting to fade Eric Anders. We got him last time. Or I'm sorry, I got him last time against Khalil Roundtree. I can't remember if I gave that out as an official pick or not. I was on it on Twitter. I think I told people on Twitter that I was going to bet Khalil Roundtree. Shout out to my boy Rocker Z for coining the phrase Khalil after that boy came back from Thailand. Ooh, Khalil Roundtree's got some heat in those hands. I'm looking forward to his future. So Eric Anders gets messed up by Khalil. He drops a split decision to Elias Theodorou, and he gets bomb KO'd by Thiago Santos, which no shame in that one. Everybody gets KO'd by Thiago Santos. Dropped a split decision, which was highly disappointing to Lyoto Machida. I was on him on that one, but he does soccer kick the head off of Tim Williams. I remember that one. We had him by KO, and he got it done with about 15 seconds left in the fight, so barely squeaked on by that one. But basically, Eric Anders is your classic big-ass athletic football player who I thought had a massive, massive ceiling. I thought he was going to be on a rocket ship straight to the top of the division, and he would just be improving every single step of the way. He is not. He really banked on that athleticism earlier in his career, and he drops bombs. The dude's explosive as hell, and he was KOing everybody he faced. Now that he's up towards the top of the division, he's just not changing that much. He is not evolving as a fighter, and that's why guys like Elias Theodorou were able to get one over on him, because he just isn't changing what he does. You watch his tape, you study what he does, and you can really see what he's going to do a mile away. So even if he is the more athletic fighter, even if he is the stronger fighter, or he has the punching power advantage, it doesn't matter, because you can game plan for this guy. So I was waiting to fade him because he's such a name. He's such a fun personality. The UFC is trying to make something of him, and I wanted to make some free money on him. That's not going to happen this week. They're giving him Morera, and this dude's 9-2, so you think he's got this great record. He was on Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series. He's flashy with 8 submission wins out of those 9 wins. Dude's got no stand-up. No stand-up whatsoever. He gets blasted by Alonzo Menafield, who, in fairness, is a good fighter with some serious heat in his hands. He is on this card. We will talk about him just a little bit later. But even in the fights on the regional scene where he's been winning, he gets iced on the feet, man. He gets touched. He is always taking shots when he's on the feet. So if he can't use his chain wrestling to get the takedown, he is fucked. And that's exactly what the UFC wants. Eric Anders is very similar to Alonzo Menafield in the way that they fight. Alonzo Menafield was able to defend those takedowns from Morera, and then he landed bombs. The second Morero couldn't get that takedown, it was over. And I think that's exactly what's going to happen here. Eric Anders is good enough to avoid the takedown, I think. I think he's strong enough. I think he's explosive enough. Not necessarily technique-wise, skill-wise. I think it's his physical stature that will allow this thing to stay standing. And then he will have his opportunity to throw back. And when he does, he will throw heat. Now, Morera's only 2 losses have come by KO, so he is truly submission or bust. He has no decisions on his record. No wins by decision, no losses by decision. So Eric Anders is not going to grind out a decision in this fight because Morera won't let him. He's either going to get finished or Morera's going to get too tired to keep his hands up, and then Eric Anders will find that jaw, and we know he's got power. So really, the only thing that you can do in this fight is take Anders by KO. It's minus 135. That's a favorite line for Anders to win by KO. If you want to lay minus 345, minus 390 on Eric Anders, you go right ahead. I will not be doing that. I do not trust Eric Anders, and even though the UFC is hand-feeding him this carrot, I still don't trust him to not shit the bed. because he's done it a couple times before, and he will do it again. Now, I hope he wins this fight. First and foremost, I like Eric Anders. As a person, on Twitter, as a personality in the cage, I actually really like the guy. I hope he gets some skills put together so I can cheer for him more as a fighter, and I hope he wins this fight so we can fade him the next time around, because if they give him one or two of these hand-fed opponents, eventually he's going to have to take a slight step up in competition, and I will be there waiting. On and on we go to the bantamweight division. I don't know why I say it that way. I always say bantam for some reason. I really pronounce the T. It's bantamweight. We're going to move on to the bantamweight decision. Fuck, I can't talk now. You guys messed me up. It's your fault. I blame you. So Ricardo Ramos is 12-2-0. He's facing Journey Newsom, who is 7-1-0. And this is another spot where this Journey Newsom is getting pulled right on off the regional scene to step in here to the deep end of the UFC's bantamweight division. Ricardo Ramos is a beast. He is 3-1 in the UFC. He did lose his last fight, but it was to Said Nurmagomedov, who really anybody who's got the Nurmi last name, the Dov last name, you can't have shame losing to 99% of those guys. They are monsters out of Russia. So Journey's got the deck stacked against him. He's stepping into like the middle to deep end of the bantamweight division on his first fight. I kind of feel a little for him in that case. The betting line also reflects that. This is another one where Ramos is a minus 300 favorite. All the money is pouring in on Ramos. You can get Journey by plus 275, plus 260, something like that, and I just don't see how he gets it done. Ramos is a really, really well-rounded fighter, and we know next to nothing about this Journey kid. And not only that, you always want to see these regional guys just absolutely dominating. He's already got a KO loss. Granted, it was to Benito Lopez, who we know well enough. He also is in the UFC at this point, so he's got a KO loss to a UFC caliber guy. But the rest of the people on his record, there's not a whole lot there to look at, and he's getting some late finishes. He's got some late submissions. He's got a late KO, but all of these guys that he's beating have losing or close to losing records. He's fighting absolute cans, and I think this is another spot where Ricardo Ramos is an absolute parlay piece here. If you want to throw him into a parlay and go for it, you go right ahead and do that, because I believe he just absolutely smashes here. Now, after last week, I'm a little biased. I'm not going to do a big parlay like I did last time. We got a little robbed on that one. We got 2 of the 3 legs and it didn't cash. So I am steering clear of doing that kind of a parlay, because I always tell you guys, every single week I get on this podcast and I tell you, you cannot handicap the human soul. You get into these fights and these guys are minus 300, minus 400, minus 500 favorites, and somebody smashes them. Somebody like Molly Meatball McCann steps in there and says, no, not on my watch. Today is my day. And they get in there and they just get the damn thing done. So I'm trying to steer away from that just for this week. We'll take a break. I know there are some wide lines, and really you can find a couple spots where you could parlay a couple of decent favorites together. I mean, like I said, if you really want to trust Eric Anders, you could parlay him up with Ricardo Ramos. If you wanted to drop back down to like Jared Gordon we talked about, instead of taking him inside the distance, he'd be a decent parlay piece with Ramos. But when you're parlaying 2 minus 300 favorites, you're still not getting underdog money. That's what I don't like. You're going to be betting. You're going to be betting like 25 to win 20, something like that. You're going to be betting 100 to win 80. These are the kinds of things that I like to avoid. I want to parlay 2 favorites and get even money or better. I want to bet 100 and win 110. I want to bet 100 and win 120. So different strokes, different folks, different styles. I'm not going to do a 3-teamer parlay, and because of that, I'm not going to be parlaying these big favorites together on this card, but massive lean and a green light if you want to go ahead and parlay some pieces up for Ricardo Ramos on this fight. And that finally moves us along to the main card. No, not the main event. The main card. This thing has a giant undercard. This is a absolutely stacked free fight. I love it. All of these fighters are going to be out here to make a name for themselves. They're going to go for the kill. They're going to go for the finish. And that makes these things fun. The casuals, the non-diehard MMA fans, They don't know any of these guys. They don't know any of these names, and they can't appreciate the skills they bring to the table. And that's something that we here at the Die Hard MMA podcast do. On a lot of these fights that we're going to be passing on, because we don't have a whole lot of information, we are logging all that information in our brains. We're going to lock it in the vault back there and remind ourselves later on exactly what those guys did and why we enjoyed what they did. We will learn and we will move forward and find good spots to bet on these guys in the future. And that's why I love these cards. Some people, if they're like, GSP's not on the card, I'm not watching this card. I don't know any of these fools. Well, you're gonna know these fools. One of these guys is gonna come out here and drop an absolute bomb. He'll be on the ESPN highlights Twitter. You know what I mean? They're gonna share that thing around. He will be shown on all the clips on all the channels, and you're gonna miss it because you didn't watch this one, because you didn't know his name. You gotta watch the young up and comers. That's how we get to be fans of them. That's how you get to know those value spots later on if you're a bettor. I won't say these cards are the best, but man, are they good if you know what to appreciate. Now we get back to that guy I mentioned a little earlier, Alonzo Menafield, 8-0. He is facing Paul the Bear Jew Craig. That was a C, by the way. Craig. He's Scottish. The man's got a Scottish, he paints his face. He's like Braveheart every single time at the weigh-ins. He gets in the face and makes everybody all mad. I'm sorry, that's a terrible impression. Sorry. All right, shit. Game face. Paul Craig is 11-3-0, facing off against Alonzo Menafield, who is 8-0, making his UFC debut. No, I'm sorry. He fought Vince Moreira. We talked about that a little earlier. He crushed Moreira as soon as Moreira ran out of gas. He has only been to the second round twice. Alonzo Menafield has only been to the second round of a mixed martial arts fight twice, and both times it ended in under a minute. He won by KO back in 2017 at 32 seconds of the second round, and he won back in 2016 at 22 seconds of the second round. So really, for all intents and purposes, this guy hasn't been out of the first round in a mixed martial arts fight. He brings heat. He's a lot like Eric Anders, where he's a former football player, so he is strong, he is explosive, and he has learned to use those hands. Now, where he's got a bit of a question mark is that ground game. We've never really seen him on the ground. We've seen him defend a couple of takedowns from some lower level competition, but we've never seen him get into it on the ground. Keep that in mind. Paul the Bear Jew Craig is 11-3-0, and it's got one of the most fun names in MMA. Just fun to say. And he has been in the UFC since back in 2016. The man has some time logged in the octagon. He's had 6 fights in the UFC, and honestly, this is one of those spots where that's a lot. I mean, Vince Moreira, we're not convinced that guy is UFC caliber, right? And Alonzo Menafield dispatched him in under 4 minutes. So he doesn't have a ton of time against UFC caliber competition or fighting in the UFC's octagon under the bright lights. Now, he passed with flying colors on that first test, but how much of a test was that first test? I'm not convinced. Paul Craig has faced an absolute mountain of competition level. Tyson Pedro, Henrique Da Silva, Tyleel Roundtree, Magomed Ankalaev, Jim Crute, and Kennedy Njoku, who Kennedy Njoku is a teammate of Alonzo Menafield, if I'm understanding correctly. I believe they train out of the same squad. Now, in his last fight, Paul Craig was getting his butt kicked by Kennedy Njoku, but we were on Paul Craig, and he pulled off that last-minute submission against Kennedy Njoku. 3rd round triangle choke, come from behind loss. And here's the thing. Everyone calls this guy a fluke. Everyone says he pulls off these fluke submissions. Oh, it was the end of the fight. He was getting his ass kicked. It was a fluke. He's done it 3 times. How many times can a guy do something like this and still be called a fluke? How many times must he do it before people recognize that it's a piece of his game? Paul Craig is not the cleanest striker, but he is improving. Paul Craig has a very offensive and opportunistic submission ground game. His 3 UFC wins have all come by submission. Now, he has gotten KO'd by Tyson Pedro and Khalil Roundtree. Jim Crute was a guy he got submitted by, and Jim Crute, honestly, if you were going to look at me and go, how do you beat Paul Craig? I give you Jim Crute. Jim Crute has bombs for hands. He's short and stocky. He's a powerhouse, and he's a high-level jiu-jitsu practitioner himself. So Jim Crute had the strength advantage, he had the striking advantage, and they were comparable on the ground. When you've got that kind of a deck stacked against you, it's going to be hard to pull that one off. Khalil Roundtree is just flat out cleaner on the feet. We know how explosive that guy is. We know how fast that guy is. We also know how good his hands are. He's been developing, and nobody gave him credit for that except maybe me. Nobody gave him credit for that, and the way he dispatched Paul Craig, I think that we should give more credit to Khalil Roundtree for that win, more so than taking credit away from Paul Craig for that loss, because he got bombed on, and it was a masterful performance by Khalil Roundtree. So Paul Craig is steadily improving, and his ground game is always a threat. We have never seen Alonzo Menefield outside of the first round, and we've never seen him against a high level of competition. Now, yes, Paul Craig has gotten KO'd twice, but honestly, his chin held up. His chin is held up against some serious bombs from his other opponents, mostly Jim Crute and Kennedy Njoku in his last couple of fights. He held up, taking some shots when he needed to. He has a decent striking defense from range, and then he clinches, he closes that distance, and he goes for the takedown. He just continues to chain and attack and takedown and takedown and takedown. They're not the cleanest things in the world. He's not the best wrestler in the world, but as soon as you get tired, as soon as you accept his invitation to brawl, you leave yourself open to hitting the mat. He's comfortable off his back, he's comfortable on top, and he knows what he's doing on the feet. You guys have got to see where this is going at this point. I think I may be the only MMA capper on the planet who is going to tell you to bet Paul the Bear Jew Craig this weekend. I am going to be on Paul the Bear Jew Craig at plus 260, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really pissed off I didn't do the podcast yesterday. Usually I record on Tuesdays. Because of some personal issues, I've got to record on Wednesdays. He got up as high as plus 295 yesterday. That's where I hit him. I hit him at plus 295. But as you all know, I keep myself to very strict standards. I will take the line that is available at the time of the podcast. We are going to rock with Paul the Bear Jew Craig at plus 260. The man never stops. He's the kind of underdog that we want to bet on because he will never give up. He will fight for your money for every single inch of this fight. He can win by submission. He can win by decision. I don't necessarily see him winning by KO, but his hands are improving, so you can never count that out. The fact that he's got more than one path to victory means there is value on that plus 260 line, and Alonzo Menefield is taking a massive step up in competition in this spot. And you can tell me all you want that Paul Craig is not a step up in competition over the guys that Alonzo Menefield has faced in his career, and I will disagree with you. I will respectfully disagree with you. I am a lot higher on Paul Craig and his skill set than other people might be, and I think this is a large step up in competition for Alonzo Menefield, and we have no idea what this guy looks like if he gets out of the first round. He was gassing out in all of his fights at the end of the first round when he couldn't get the immediate knockout, when he's chasing the knockout, when he's forced to grapple, especially against Moreira. When he had to grapple just a little bit, and that was only a 4-minute fight, he was starting to slow down. His arms started to get heavy. If this thing goes to round 2, I think Paul Craig has a huge opportunity to get it done either by decision or doing one of his fluke submissions. Let's go Bear Jew. Plus 260. The next fight is at 155 pounds. We've got Drew Dober facing on Marco El Toro Polo Reyes. I don't know why his fight name is El Toro. His middle name is Polo. He's already Marco Polo. You don't need a better name than that. Drew Dober is 20 and 9. Not 29 and 0, 20 and 9. Drew Dober is 20 and 9. Marco Polo Reyes is only 8 and 5. That right there is more than likely why the line sits where it's at. Drew Dober opened up at minus 265 and has been bet all the way up to minus 380. He's another one of these big old favorites that if you want to take a stab at a parlay, that's what literally everybody else is going to be doing. Now, Marco Polo Reyes has had a little bit of a spotty run. He put together a nice win streak when he got to the UFC, but then he got KO'd by James Vick. He did bounce back with a very impressive KO over Matt, the Steamroller Frivola, and then he got TKO'd by Damir Hadzovic. Now, little grain of salt to give on the Hadzovic fight. Hadzovic and Vic are both taller and longer than Marco Reyes, and that was something that he appeared very much to struggle with in those fights. James Vic KO'd him clean. No questions, no arguments there. Damir Hadzovic, on the other hand, he kind of rocked him a bit. He got him on the ground. He tied him up. He took back mount, and then he postured up and started raining down punches. The ref saved Marco Reyes in that spot. I have heard a lot of people talking about his durability and how that's in question. And I know, KO losses is not a good thing to have, but that was another one of those ones where it wasn't a bad KO loss. The ref saved him. He was covering up. He was okay. He wasn't bleeding all over the place, and he definitely wasn't out cold on his, down face down on the mat. Well, he was face down on the mat, but he was getting pounded, and he was defending himself the best he could from a back mount type of situation. So we've got to put a little bit of a pin in that if you're going to have that height and reach advantage, you are going to give him trouble. And then if you've got that grappling advantage where you can get on his back and pin him down like that, I think that's the only time I've seen him get put in that kind of a position. And Marco, unfortunately, had to get saved by the ref against Damir. So let's move over to Drew Dober, who dropped a submission loss to Beneil Dariush. Now, Dober's one of these guys who he fought very comfortably at 170 for a while, but his home, he's just a little too small for 170. His real home is at 155. He's on a decent run right now, and his only 3 losses in the last 4 years have come by submission. Efrain Escudero, which embarrassing kind of because he fell off the map. Olivier Aubin-Mercier, who is a ground specialist and a beast. And then Beneil Dariush, who we know is a can crusher in this division. He's a gatekeeper, and he's got a very dangerous, well-rounded pressure game. And if he has a submission advantage on you or a grappling advantage on you, he will push it, and you will go to sleep. So not a lot of shame in losing to those 3 guys, especially by submission, but it is obviously a hole in Drew Dober's game. Now, unfortunately, he's not facing an opponent who will be able to make use of that. Marco Polo Reyes only has 1 submission win on his entire career, and that was before he got into the UFC. He hasn't even really threatened with a ground game ever since. The dude likes to stand and bang. He is your classic Mexican fighter. He gets in there and he uses his hands. Every once in a while, he'll go to a leg kick, and when he does, it's a thing of beauty, but for the most part, he uses excellent foot and head movement and gets in to land some bombs. Now, he was giving some guys trouble. All 3 of his last fights, he was going toe-to-toe with Hadzovic. He KO'd Matt Frevola clean. And then he actually had a nice little back and forth with James Vic before he got caught. And really, what I'm seeing in this spot is that the real hitch in Polo Reyes' game is if you are taller and longer than he is. Now, Drew Dober's got an excellent striking pedigree. He's also a judo black belt, I believe. So he is no stranger to the ground. He's become a very good wrestler and just seems to be very, very well-rounded. He's kind of the new gatekeeper at 155. I don't think we're ever going to see him in the deep end of the division, but he is a stepping stone for people who are trying to get past there. He's only 30 years old, so he's got a couple years. You never know. Maybe he improves. Maybe he moves up. But as of right now, we've got to take him the way he is. He's got a solid, well-rounded game, and we've got to decide if Marco Polo Reyes is capable of finding a chink in that armor. I think this line is wide. I'm very, very tempted to take a flyer on Marco Polo Reyes. He is sitting at plus 295 at BetOnline, and I just think that is so, so wide. I know he's been KO'd in 2 of his last 3 fights, but those were against taller and longer opponents, and only one of those was a clean KO. This time he is going to be the taller and longer opponent, and I think he might be able to stick and move and stay on the outside. And Drew Dober, he might be ripe. He might be ripe for an upset. I think I'm going to have to pass. I came into this podcast and I honestly wasn't sure which way I wanted to go on this one. I did a decent amount of studying, and I'm going to have a big lean to Marco Polo Reyes. I think if anyone's going to come in here and starch Drew Dober, he could be the guy to do it because this is the right matchup for him. The only problem is the deficiency on the ground. If Drew Dober decides to put his judo and grappling game to use, he wins this thing. And he is a smart enough fighter to do that. And that's the reason I'm hesitant on this line. If I'm getting plus 290, that's the right price to roll the dice on a big dog with bombs for hands like Marco Polo Reyes has. And Drew Dober is a striker who likes to strike. So if he makes the bad choice to make a statement and to get in there and prove that he's the better striker and stand with Polo Reyes, that bet is going to be live as hell. But if Drew Dober comes in and says, I'm going to get the win because I'm coming off of a loss and I need to get back on track, and he grinds on Polo Reyes, then he wins this fight. More than likely, relatively easily and handily. So it pains me. It pains me to take a pass. But I'm going to go ahead and pass on this fight, unfortunately. Just a heads up, though. You can get Reyes by KO at plus 725, and that line is juicy as shit. Next up, we've got Roosevelt Roberts. We're going to stick around in the lightweight division. This fight is going down at 155. Vince from Hell Pichel, 11-2, is taking on 8-0 Roosevelt Roberts. And I don't know what to make of this fight. I really don't know what to make of this fight. Roosevelt Roberts is a big favorite. Again, like the rest of the freaking card, it looks like everybody's all on the same fighters. And not all of them are going to get it done, guys. I can guarantee you a couple of these dudes are going to shit the bed. Some big juicy dogs are coming through this week. He's sitting at about minus 265, minus 280 at this point. And I just think that is way too wide for an untested fighter. Now, Vince Pichel got ground out by Gregor Gillespie, who we know is just a freaking tank and a monster on the mat. Before that, he was on a 4-fight win streak, and he lost to Rustam Habilov in his UFC debut. Roosevelt Roberts is very young in his UFC tenure. He won off of the Contender Series back in 2018, and he's had 2 solid fights in the UFC. First round submission against Daryl Horcher, and then he had a unanimous decision win just back in April of 2019. So he is staying active. But this is kind of a crossroads fight. I mean, Vince Pichel has obviously fought the higher level of talent, but he did not fare quite so well against that higher level of talent. And he's getting in here with Roosevelt Roberts, who is a bit of a beast. I mean, he's finished 7 of his 8 fights. He's got 3 KOs and 4 submission wins, and he just shows no sign of slowing down right now. I'm relatively impressed with him, but I do also understand that he's a bit of a hype train. I think that Vince Pichel is live. I think that the line is wide, but much like last week where I felt like some of the lines were wide and those favorites were still just going to get it done, that's kind of how I feel about this fight. I feel like Vince is going to give in here. He's going to get in here, and I apologize for the dad joke in advance, but he's going to give him hell. He's going to give Roosevelt Roberts hell. But I think Roosevelt Roberts does get it done in the end, and I'm not interested in putting my money on this spot because I do not have a clear read on either of these fighters, and I don't see a clear hole in either of these games. Now, Roberts winning by KO is a prop that I wouldn't mind sprinkling. That's plus 700, and like I said, he does have 3 KO wins on his record. Granted, it was a lower level of competition, and he's more of a ground specialist, but you know, sometimes weird shit happens. If you get a guy on the ground, you pin him down, much like Damir Hadzovic did just in that last fight we were breaking down for Marco Polo Reyes. If he won't give that neck up, you just start pounding away. You can get a TKO win on the mat, even if you're a jiu-jitsu guy. And that plus 700 does not look bad. So those are the kind of props that I would be willing to kind of take a swing at. But like I said, I'm going to completely steer clear of this fight. On the flip side, if you like Pichel, he's got a damn good KO prop on him too at plus 825. And 8 of his 11 wins have come by knockout, with at least one of those coming against Damian Brown in the UFC, so he can get it done on the feet as well. This one should be a banger. Honestly, betting aside, this one is going to be a fun one to watch. Mark this one, put a little checkbox next to it. This one is going to be a hell of a fight. It should be entertaining, and it might even be the one that gets fight of the night as far as a brawl and a back-and-forth fight goes on this card. Now we get to the real meat and potatoes of this bad boy. Damian Maia is back, ladies and gentlemen. Damian Maia is facing off against Anthony Rocco Martin. Maia is 26-9, and he is 41 years young. Anthony Rocco Martin is 29 years old, 16-4. He's on an impressive 4-fight win streak. And you all know my rule about betting fighters that are over the age of 40. There are very, very few rules on this podcast, but one of those is if somebody is over the age of 40, I have to have a damn good reason to bet on them.
The code is more what you'd call guidelines than actual rules. Welcome aboard the Black Pearl.
Damian Maia is the best jiu-jitsu practitioner the UFC has ever seen. He has complemented that with an incredible chain grappling takedown attack, and he just does not stop. Now, he just wrecked Lyman Good, and we were all over him by submission in that last fight. Prior to that, if you remember that last breakdown, he fought Tyrone Woodley, Colby Covington, and Kamaru freaking Usman, the number 1, 2, and 3 of the division, and he lost by 5-round decision to all 3 of them because they were such superior wrestlers to him. Nobody in the 170-pound division can stop Damian Maia's takedown except for those 3 men, and because of that, those 3 men are the only ones who can beat him. Anthony Rocco Martin is not the guy who's going to step in here and be able to stuff Damian Maia's takedowns for 3 straight rounds. Now, he has been coming into his own as a striker. He has been developing very, very well. He's young, he's strong, he's athletic, he's explosive, and he is a member of American Top Team. Don't get me wrong, Anthony Rocco Martin is very, very dangerous. But right now, Damian Maia is a money train. He just came back in February of this year, and he proved to us where he belongs. He proved to us the kind of fighter that he is, and I truly believe that he is number 4 or number 5 in the division, and it's unfortunate he will never get past those top-tier caliber wrestlers. Rocco Martin does not have that kind of a wrestling pedigree. Rocco Martin actually gives up the takedown very, very easily. Now, I know he's a smart man. He's not going to come into this fight looking to scramble with a guy like Damian Maia, looking to wrestle or play jiu-jitsu with Damian Maia. That's not what he's going to do. He wants to defend the takedown, and he wants to go for the knockout. The only problem with that, now it sounds great, right? He's a phenomenal striker. He's got bombs in his hands and his legs. He is a knockout threat. But the only problem with that is what happens when you face wrestlers and grapplers of the caliber of a guy like Damian Maia is they stifle your offense. You can't do the things that you want to do because Damian Maia does what he does. So Rocco Martin is not going to be able to come out there and throw a giant head kick, because if you do, that leg is up. Damian Maia can sneak under it. He can put his shoulder underneath it and push, and you're on your back. And that is the last place in the world that you want to be against Damian frickin' Maia. If you come out and you start throwing bombs and you plant your feet, he scoops in for a double leg. And if you defend that double leg, he grabs a single leg. And if you step away from that one, he grabs an ankle pick. And then when you get up, he's on your back. That's the kind of fighter that Damian Maia is. And because of that, he is going to show exactly how damn good he is. And I think if he keeps up the kind of game plan that he has, if he keeps bringing the same exact kind of fight that he has been to the table, he's a mountain to climb for these young fighters. He is a ultimate gatekeeper because he is so strong in the grappling area that you have to be amazing or have the perfect set of skills to overcome that deficit. And I don't think that Anthony Rocco Martin does. I am going to take a stab on Damian Maia. I do not blame you if you want to play him straight. Some money has come in on Rocco Martin. It's driven the line down a little bit. You can get Damian Maia at about minus 175 right now. And honestly, as a straight bet, I do not think that that is such a bad deal. He does have some decision wins, like a split decision win over Jorge Masvidal. He went to decision with Gunnar Nelson. But you've got to look at these guys that he's beating by decision. They all have very solid ground games. I don't think that Rocco Martin can defend himself on the mat. So instead, we are going to go to Old Faithful. That's right. 5 Dimes has once again stepped up to the plate, and they're giving us dog money on our favorite bet, maybe of all time. Maia wins by submission at plus 150. We're going to do it again. We're going straight back to the well. And I know you don't always want to go straight back to the well, but this is the guy who basically only wins by submission because that's what he does. This is the guy who's so good you can't stop it. This is the guy that if he's on top of you, you are not going to survive. He will make it happen. Now, if you are grinding wrestling back and forth with him like Usman, Covington, and Woodley did, and he has no opportunity to submit, then there's a shot this thing goes to decision. But if Anthony Rocco Martin gives up the takedown, which I truly believe he will, this thing doesn't go to the judges. Damian Maia by submission, plus 150, lock it up. The co-main event of the evening is basically a number one contender fight in the 125-pound division, which is currently being held up by the triple champion and our favorite fighter, Henry the freaking man Cejudo, the triple champion. He now owns the 125 and 135 pound belt. So this is basically a title eliminator. The only problem is Cejudo won't be back in action until 2020. And what that means is we don't really know what these guys are fighting for. The 125 pound division might be gone by the time Cejudo is back. They still aren't sure whether or not they're keeping it around, and it's about as thin as it gets. So they could have thrown an interim title fight on this one if they wanted to. This one is more than likely a number one contender spot, but the guy who wins it may not even be getting that next crack at the title because it's going to be a while if they want to stay active. But it's going to be a banger. We've got Jussier Formiga, who is 23-5, facing off against longtime staple of the division, Joseph Benavidez, who is 27-5-0. Now, Formiga is 34 years old, and that is matched by Joseph Benavidez. It feels like Joseph Benavidez has been around for a whole heck of a lot longer than Jussier Formiga, but that is just flat not true. These guys match up really, really interestingly. Joseph Benavidez is mostly a boxer. He sticks and moves and he boxes and he uses his wrestling ability to keep the fight where he wants it. He's basically your prototypical team alpha male dude. Jussier Formiga comes out of American Top Team. He's got a solid jiu-jitsu submission game, and then he's developing very, very well as a striker. He's more than likely, I guess you lean more toward the submission side of things with Jussier Formiga than you do the striking, in my opinion. And I feel like Joseph Benavidez is just a little bit the opposite. He's a solid wrestler, but he likes to use his hands more so than he does the grappling attack. He really just kind of corrals the fight where he wants it to be. And then he beats his opponents into submission. Now, that's not to say he has a whole lot of KO victories. He actually has a lot of decision victories, but he basically just overwhelms everybody. So, oh boy, the last two losses on Benavidez' record are Demetrius Johnson for his title fight all the way back in 2013, and he's basically whopped everybody, including the current champion Henry Cejudo in December of 2016. That was one of the closest split decisions I've ever seen, and I was live for that fight at the UFC Ultimate Fighter 24 finale. It was a hell of a fight, and I actually am really happy I wasn't a judge that night because I would not have known which way to score it. Now, after winning that split against Cejudo, he dropped a split to Sergio Pettis, which that was unfortunate, and I honestly don't know if I believe in that one. Either way, it was a close fight. Both of those fights could have gone either way. He came back strong against Alex Perez, wins that thing by KO, and then grinds out a decision win against Dustin Ortiz. The man has fought everybody that 125 pounds has to offer. Now, Jussier Formiga, his last three losses are going to be against Joseph Benavidez himself back in 2013, where he got TKO'd, and then he lost a split decision to Henry Cejudo in 2015, and he lost a decision to Ray Borg. Now, this is a fight where, one of my, guidelines, I guess, is that the younger man wins rematches. Well, these two are the same age. Joseph Benavidez, I don't believe is training at Team Alpha Male anymore. I think he left Team Alpha Male. So we have to kind of question, does that mean he made a good move? Because Team Alpha Male seems to be kind of struggling and falling apart at the seams at this point. Or does that mean he made a bad move because he's out of his comfort zone? Maybe they were getting a lot of younger fighters in and it started to look more like a puppy pen. They're kind of corralling. They're not really paying attention to their old stars anymore because they're dwindling and dying out. And that's kind of what happened with guys like Cowboy Cerrone, who we go back and saw him go on a real resurgence because he decided that he was the A-side. He decided that he was the one that people needed to be spending their time and money and focus on, and they just weren't. So he splits off on his own and suddenly skyrockets. Time will tell, I guess. We're in kind of a precarious position here with Joseph Benavidez, but there is one thing that I know for sure, and that's that Benavidez has been the number 2 guy at 125 pounds for as long as I can remember. His 2 losses to Demetrius Johnson, he has 2 losses to Dominic Cruz, and that's basically it. He's got the split loss to Sergio Pettis, but he has only lost to the best of the absolute freaking best. And I don't think he's necessarily slipped. Jose Formiga is an impressive fighter in his own right, and he seems to be coming into his own with back-to-back submission wins over Yutaka Sasaki, Ben Win, and then decision wins over Sergio Pettis and Davison Figueroa. That this fight is another one that's just going to be a banger. Now, we cashed on Jose Formiga against Davison Figueroa, and I'm having a hard time with that last name again, but he was 15-0 coming into that fight, and we really just banked on the fact that Jose Formiga was going to be the more polished fighter and be able to avoid the big bombs to get it done by decision, and he sure as hell did, and that might have been one of the most impressive performances that I've seen from Formiga. So this is really a sharp fighter against a sharp fighter, and I hate the line. Benavidez is a minus 165 favorite. Bounce back is on Formiga at plus 145. And I think that's about accurate. I think that Joseph Benavidez is the rightful favorite in this spot because of that wrestling advantage. He does have the ability to KO and finish this thing, but his wrestling really is going to determine where the fight takes place. And because of that, Formiga is not going to be able to get his submission game rolling. Nobody submits Joseph Benavidez. He only has 4 losses and he has 5 losses, 1 KO and 4 by decision. And that 1 KO came from the GOAT. It came from Demetrius freaking Johnson when he was at the peak of Demetrius freaking Johnson's skill level. So I don't know that Formiga can finish him. I don't think that's something that's going to happen. I expect this fight to be a slobber knocker, bang out, drag out fight. If anyone's going to finish it, I think it'd be Benavidez by KO or TKO. But I don't know if he has that necessarily in the tank anymore. I really do think that it goes to a 3-round decision, but it's kind of a coin toss at that point. I don't know that there's any value on either of these lines. If you wanted to take the dog money on Formiga because this is a close fight, I don't blame you for that whatsoever. I think this is going to be a hairy decision, and because of that, I'm going to stay off it. I really thought that I was going to be on Joseph Benavidez. I kind of wanted to be on Joseph Benavidez. I do think that he is the more skilled of the 2 fighters overall. And maybe that's the wrong way to say that. He's not the more skilled fighter. He is the rock to Jose Formiga's scissors. I think this is a stylistic matchup that favors Benavidez. And because of that, I think the line is accurate. I don't think there's any value in that line. Benavidez by 3-round decision is plus 145, and to be fair, I kind of like that. Turns the favorite completely, flips the line, get you a little bit of extra value there. But if it does go to decision, it's probably gonna be a split. So this is one where maybe when the totals come out, if you can get a decent line on the over 2.5, because I'm sure it'll be set at the 2.5, that might be something to consider playing. But as sad as I am to say it, I'm going to have a lean to Joseph Benavidez by decision, and unfortunately this fight will be a pass. That brings us to the main event of the evening. Francis the Predator Ngannou, Frankie Murder, returns, and he's facing Junior Dos Santos. What a fight to get at the end of this card. We're going to have a full stacked fun night of fights, and then we're going to end in the UFC's heavyweight division with 2 of its premier fighters. I love it. And you all know how high I am on Francis Ngannou. I made a bold statement a while ago when we bet him as a big underdog against Curtis Blades that you would never see that kind of money on him ever again. And that holds true, ladies and gentlemen. He's sitting at about a minus 240, minus 250 favorite right now. We know all there is to know about Francis Ngannou. He's an athletic, genetic freak. He will step in there and he throws with bigger bombs than anybody on the planet. There is not a man alive that punches harder than Francis Ngannou. Junior Dos Santos is the former UFC heavyweight champion. He is 21-5, and he has had a bit of an issue. He had kind of a rough run where it really started to look like he had lost his chin. He changed his style up, and he's been very impressive as of late. I tried to fade him a couple times, and it just didn't work. I didn't learn my lesson. But you know what? Damn it, it's going to happen this time. I know a lot of people who are banking on Junior Dos Santos at that dog price. He's been a dog in his last couple fights, or you've been able to get a good, solid price on him, and that was sharp. I missed the boat. His last 3 wins have been very, very masterful performances, and they really remind us how Junior got to be the champion of the heavyweight division in the first place. I've been more than impressed watching him the last couple of fights, but this is where the buck stops, because Francis Ngannou has so much power in his hands that all it takes is one slip up. Junior Dos Santos is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He has a massive ground advantage here in this fight, but this fight is not going to go to the ground. Junior will not be able to get the takedown on Francis Ngannou because he is not a wrestler, and unless he gets a knockdown somehow, or unless Francis slips, which I don't think has ever happened in the UFC, I do not see how Junior Dos Santos gets Francis to the mat. And this is also a 5-rounder. This is one of those ones where there's no way this damn thing goes the distance. Francis Ngannou by KO is the play. -170. I do not like taking that big of a favorite line on a prop bet, because it just really limits your options here. But let's face it, the only time Francis Ngannou has gone the full 5 rounds, he's lost. He's got 3 decisions on his record, and all 3 of them have been losses, most recently and most notably to Stipe Miocic. I guess not most recently, because he did have that crazy stupid loss to Derek Lewis where neither guy did anything and all the judges basically flipped a coin as to who they wanted to give it to, because neither of them did literally anything. But Stipe Miocic was the one that was able to force him into the deep waters, was able to grind him out, wear him out. But Stipe is a wrestler. Junior Dos Santos is not. If this thing goes the 5-round distance, Stipe will not be winning a shot-for-shot boxing point style fight with Dos Santos. I would expect Dos Santos to actually come out on top in that kind of a match. Francis has 5 rounds to monitor his gas tank and to find the jaw of Junior Dos Santos, and I just flat think that he gets it done. I expect it to come in the first or in the second round, because that's really just what he does. That round 2 prop might be something that is a little fun to look into, because I will think that Francis Ngannou kind of takes his time a little bit here. He's been more respectful of his opponents lately. He's been kind of taking a deep breath and pacing himself a little bit more. Now, I know his record doesn't look like it. He crushed Curtis Blades in 45 seconds. He crushed Cain Velasquez in 26 seconds. But neither of them really offered much of a striking threat. Junior Dos Santos does. So I don't know if Junior Dos Santos will try and play the Matador in this spot. We might get a fun little line on that round 2 prop. Official prediction is Francis Ngannou in round 2 by KO, and we're going to take the KO prop -170. This is just one of those spots where all we're betting on is that big bomb, and it's gonna happen. It eventually will find its way through the guard of Junior Dos Santos, and there's only so much you can do when you're trapped in a cage with this man to stay away from that bomb. So I'm a fan of Junior Dos Santos. I acknowledge that he is probably the more well-rounded fighter here. Well, he's definitely the more well-rounded fighter here, but he is also probably the cleaner striker of the 2 still, and it's just not gonna matter. Frankie Murder rolls. And that will do it. Let's get a recap of those picks. We are going to rock with Jared Gordon by KO at +380. We are going to roll the dice with Paul the Bear Jew Craig to pull another fluke upset at +260. We're going to trust in Damian Maia's submission game and rock that +150 juicy line, and then give me all the money on Francis Ngannou by KO at -170. We've got a couple of leans on this card that we weren't quite able to pull the trigger on, but it's gonna be a banger. Thank you all for the love and support. I plan to get back on the winning track on this one. Give the show a like, throw me a retweet, give me some comments and some thumbs up in the YouTube comments. How about some subscriptions? Show some love and support for the show. I work my ass off for this thing and I bring you some quality content and hopefully a little entertainment. Hit me up on Twitter at DieHardMMAPod. We're on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. Once again, thank you all for the support. Let's roll.